Welcome. My name is Don Davis. I'm the Editor-in-Chief at Internet Retailer, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. We'll be talking about data and how online retailers can use it effectively to drive sales and to measure the results. Our speakers are Justin Cutroni, an analytics advocate at Google, and Nick Iyengar, Associate Director of Digital Intelligence at Cardinal Path, a digital agency that provides services in such areas as attribution, customer segmentation, and data visualization, and the sponsor of today's webinar. After they speak, we'll take your questions. You can ask questions at any time using the chat box on your screen. And in the next day or two, everyone on the call will get an email with a link to today's presentation so you can see it again and share it with colleagues. So to get started, we know that putting data to effective use can be complicated, but it's crucially important, especially during the holiday season that is now upon us. Most of the growth in retail is coming from online, as this chart shows. And the online retailers that can unlock the value of their data can reap the biggest rewards. But it's complicated for many reasons. For one thing, consumers shop lots of ways, especially during the holiday season. This chart shows just some of the kinds of stores that people will be shopping in. Most will shop online at some point, but many will also shop in discount stores, department stores, specialty stores, supermarkets, and other retail outlets. And there are a lot of ways to segment them as they shop. In this chart, I broke out responses from consumers with annual household incomes of more than $50,000 from all respondents to this survey, which was conducted by the National Retail Federation. As you can see, more affluent shoppers are especially likely to shop online in the upcoming holiday season. That's also true of the highly desirable demographic of consumers from their mid-20s to mid-40s, people starting their first households or moving into larger homes as they move up the career ladder. And age is another way you can segment your customers for more effective marketing. Further complicating matters for retailers is the growing number of devices consumers use to shop. In particular, we're seeing a significant increase in consumers making purchases on smartphones, now that retailers' mobile websites and apps are better and mobile phone screens are bigger. And they use their smartphones for many shopping-related purposes, even when they're in stores. With all the ways consumers can get information and buy, and with all the devices they use, the shopping journey is more complex than ever, and consumers are leaving digital footprints all along the way, giving retailers a lot of data to work with, and for many more than they can handle. Of course, since consumers are researching and shopping in many ways, retailers are trying to reach them at every step along the path to purchase, and all these marketing methods feed even more data to retailers. And that creates a problem of its own. Which marketing channel gets credit when a consumer and a retailer cross paths in so many ways before the consumer ultimately makes her purchase? As you can see from this data from Forrester Research and Shop.org, the most common method online retailers use is to attribute the sale to the last interaction with the consumer. But that method is only favored by 38% of the retailers in this survey from early this year. There are several other ways retailers do it, and 19% of the retailers in the survey simply said, "I don't know how we attribute the sale." So that's just one indication that many retailers are overwhelmed by all the data they collect and not able to use it effectively. But there is technology that can help and best practices that are emerging, and that's what our speakers will be discussing today. As I said earlier, our speakers are Justin Cutroni, Analytics Advocate at Google, and Nick Iyengar, Associate Director of Digital Intelligence at Cardinal Path. Remember, you can ask any questions at any time. We'll take them at the end, and everyone will get an email the next day or two with a link to today's presentation. So with that, I will turn the mic over to Justin and Nick.
All right, thanks a lot, Don. Appreciate the great tee up there. So let's just go ahead and dive right into it. Let's see if I have the slide controls here. There we go. Perfect. So let's jump in. This is Nick Iyengar from Cardinal Path, and I'll take a quick look here at what we're going to look at today. A few different topics we're going to cover. So I'll start us out by talking a bit about just why it is in the first place that analytics can help us in the e-commerce space actually go beyond kind of regular reporting and analysis and actually create competitive advantage for our businesses. I'll talk a bit about sort of the groundwork that needs to be laid as well. You know, in e-commerce we have some luxuries when it comes to analytics, and I'll talk about that in just a second, but there is a lot of kind of foundational groundwork that does need to be laid first. So we'll cover that a bit, but then we'll spend the bulk of our discussion just talking about analysis techniques for major impact. So Justin and I will kind of ping pong that back and forth and cover a few specific topics and show you what I think are some really compelling cases from major retailers, both here in the US and around the world. So let's dive in. Like I said, you know, in the e-commerce industry, we actually have a luxury that our counterparts in industries that are sort of B2B tend not to have, and that is that you actually have your key business outcomes happening within the scope of your digital environment. And that may sound really simple, but put yourself in the shoes of someone that works in B2B or who works in an environment that doesn't have e-commerce, right? You have these long sales cycles, sales processes that happen offline, very difficult to connect things like marketing spend with sales outcomes, right? And so in e-commerce, we have this amazing luxury that all that stuff is happening in a way that's relatively more easy for us to measure. Now, you couple that with the fact that our tools in analytics are becoming more and more sophisticated. We know more about our visitors and more about our customers than we ever have before, which is an amazing opportunity for a variety of reasons. One is it opens the door to not just optimize the user experience on our sites, but really to deliver personalized experiences at scale. It also lets us do things like use our data, use our previous data that we've collected to do things like predictive modeling, purchase intent modeling. So use our data from the past to predict what's going to happen in the future and start getting proactive instead of just reactive. It also helps us better calculate things like customer lifetime value. So we want to dedicate our marketing spend to attracting the most valuable customers. And again, in the e-commerce space, you know, it's just super exciting because all this stuff is really happening right within the scope of our websites or potentially our mobile apps. And so this data is just much more accessible to us and a bit more tangible than it is to businesses who don't have the luxury of doing e-commerce. So that's why I'm excited about analytics in the e-commerce space. It just makes this a lot more approachable and it's a lot faster to kind of jump in and just dive into this exciting stuff. So a couple things to say, though. I mean, I don't want to create the impression that analytics in e-commerce is easy or simple or doesn't require a lot of hard work. Indeed, there is a lot of strategy and technology work that needs to happen first, and it's important to do it in that order. So what I'm showing you here is kind of a quick maturity curve or maturity path that we try to go through with our clients. And I'll take you through it kind of working backwards here. So, you know, everybody invests in analytics so that they can get to a point where they can confidently make data-driven decisions that have a serious impact on the business, right? I think that goes without saying. But how do you get there, right? Well, I think the prerequisite for that kind of confident, impactful decision-making is relevant insights, right? You need to have specific, relevant insights if you want to be able to make any decisions confidently. So the question then becomes, well, how do you get relevant insights? And so the superficial answer to that is you need to have an analytics tool that's been implemented correctly and completely on your site and in your apps. But more importantly, you need to have an implementation that's really driven by some upfront strategy, right? That's driven by business requirements, and that's driven by KPIs that are agreed upon across the organization. And so what we try to do with our clients is start up front, right? Before we dive into the implementation and setting up tools, putting code on the site, developing a tag management system, we try to start up front with that strategy because that's going to help you later on downstream get those relevant insights that really enable that kind of confident decision making. So what exactly is a KPI framework? When we work with a lot of clients, when we get started, we see that they are measuring some important metrics, some key performance indicators, things like revenue and transactions and order size and all the kind of classic e-commerce KPIs that you're probably familiar with. But we find that they track these things often sort of in an ad hoc manner, sort of in a vacuum. And so what we try to do for our clients is help them take all their KPIs and put them into a more robust, structured framework. And there are a lot of frameworks out there. These aren't something that we've invented ourselves, but things like net income or the customer life cycle or customer journey, they help you take your individual KPIs and structure them in a way that provides context, helps you prioritize your optimization efforts, helps you understand how performance in certain KPIs impacts performance of other KPIs on your site. And so What you're seeing here on the right-hand side of your screen is a customer lifecycle or customer journey framework, and metrics like sales, revenue, transactions. Those are sort of conversion type metrics, what you'd see in the convert stage, and most of our clients are very good at tracking those. What we find that they're not often tracking, though, is KPIs that sort of influence future conversion. So things like attracting relevant traffic to your site in the first place, building meaningful engagement with them over time. And it's not just that, and the story doesn't end at conversion, right? Conversion is important, but we also want to think about things like how do we retain customers over time. It's generally speaking much more efficient for us to keep our existing customers than it is to go out and buy a bunch of new ones. And then lastly, we don't just want to retain customers, we want to delight them and make them really happy. We want them to become our advocates. We want them to say nice things about us on social media. We want them to post positive reviews on our site about our products and services, and so on. And so taking those individual KPIs and laying them across a structured framework really helps for a variety of reasons. You can see a basic example here on the left-hand side with this dashboard that we built for one of our clients where, again, we're not just tracking KPIs in the conversion stage, but actually across the entire customer journey so that we know where we need to invest in terms of our optimization efforts. Okay, so that's a KPI framework, and what I'd leave you with here before we jump into some of the analytics techniques that we're going to cover is that we're at a stage in the industry now where the sheer implementation of an analytics tool is rarely kind of the most challenging aspect of seeing a positive return on your analytics investment. These tools are basically just JavaScript snippets. With the advent of tag management systems, it's become increasingly easy to implement and then customize these tools over time. So the implementation itself is really not as often the key challenge. It's much more about having an implementation that's not just sort of superficially sound in a technical manner, but again, really driven by an agreed upon KPI framework and business requirements. So again, there's a lot of exciting opportunities in analytics for e-commerce, but we want to lay the groundwork by having that KPI framework in place before we jump into all the fun and exciting tools and features. But speaking of those, I'm going to toss it over to my good friend Justin to take us through a few different features, and these are things that my favorite tool, Google Analytics, just does really, really well. So we'll talk about multi-channel funnels, we'll talk about attribution modeling, really exciting feature, and then we'll talk about remarketing as well. So Justin, I'm going to toss it over to you, and you can take us through multi-channel funnels.
Awesome, thanks so much, Nick. And I'm thinking back to what Don was talking about at the beginning, and he was showing us some data about 38% of businesses are using a last-click model to measure the efficiency of their digital marketing and their digital advertising, and 19% have no clue what's happening. I think we can all agree that the world of digital requires us to stay in front of our customers and our potential customers, right? That's why we're investing in so many digital channels like display advertising, email, medium, paid search. We're pushing our messages out there. And we know that we're hitting people with all of these messages multiple times in order to drive them through that process, in order to drive them through the funnel and ultimately to get a conversion. But as you'll see on the next slide, we're still using kind of this flawed methodology in terms of measurement, right? 38% are still using last click. And we're ignoring our investment in all of these other channels. Now, we're counting it if these other channels are at the end of the purchase cycle for a particular user. But the reality is we need better measurement, right? We need a better way to understand how are all of these things working together? How are they all working in unison in order to drive value within our organization? And that's one of the things that we've been trying to do with Google Analytics actually for a number of years now. A great way to get into this is this feature that we built called Multichannel Funnels, right? Where the idea is that we can, move away from this last-click model, and we can start to see where do these channels overlap, right? How is their actual interaction between these channels? So if I look at my organic search and my paid search, not only how do they operate under a last-click model, but how do they operate together? What happens when I put those two things together? How do they impact the overall results? How do they assist and help each other? And that's really kind of the mental model that we want businesses to get into, right? Don't think of things as siloed channels. but think of things as working together, like a symphony, right? All together to sound great at the same time. And we're able to do this now because, as Nick was talking about, the world of digital is unbelievably data rich. There's so much information, and we have the opportunity to kind of put these things together and see them working together. We couldn't do this 5 years or 10 years ago, right? This is actually something that's pretty recent, and it's totally due to just the amount of data we have and the tools that we're building. And so, why is this type of thing useful? Like, how can you actually use this? Well, let's look at a quick case study to kind of dive into this feature called multi-channel funnels. And we'll use a hotel chain in Southeast Asia called Amari. And I think they're like a lot of businesses, right? And they were investing in a lot of different places in the digital world. They were looking at display, they were looking at search, they were doing email. But from a technology, from a measurement, and even from an organizational perspective, they were still focused on which channels brought me the most conversions, and that was it. And they didn't really have a good understanding of how were they all working together. And that's why we kind of showed them this feature, this multi-channel funnels feature, and went through it with them to see what they could figure out. So the first thing that we did was we just tried to figure out, like, okay, well, what was the path to conversion, right? And this is something that's critical to understand. This is actually data that we have in analytics right now. It's a general path, and what they found out was that 44% of their bookings were coming after a single visit, okay? So there was still, this insight now that it's like, whoa, okay, so there's a lot of other folks, right, 56, a lot of other conversions that require multiple interactions. We need to re-engage people, right? We need to bring people back. That's a very strategic insight, right? We need to be able to push people through the funnel and keep them moving, right? And that might be through incentives, it might be through different types of content marketing, but that's a really important thing for them to understand, right? Understanding what is the funnel, how long does it take, drives, what are we going to do, right? And so one of the things that the multi-channel funnels report will show you is we'll show you actually the paths of the different marketing channels that lead to conversion. Now, a channel is something that you can define in the product. It can be anything from paid search to organic search, display advertising, email, social, referral. We have kind of defaults in there, but you can totally customize these things, and we can actually show you the path for every session that the user had, every session they engaged with the website. We can show you what was the driver, and then ultimately we can show you the conversion at the end, right? So here, just looking at this, we can see this top converting path was direct traffic, people coming directly to the website, and then arriving via organic search, and then coming back directly after that. And after that, we see some variations that include paid search, and at the bottom of this table, we see a couple of short paths that have referral and then multiple organic touches. And so now we're gaining the insight into, like, okay, now we see what are the actual channels, and we can actually drill into these channels and see what are the campaigns, what are the attributes of those campaigns that are actually generating those conversions. And this is good, right? Because now we've moved away from a last click model, and we're starting to get some insight into understanding, like, oh, it's just not one thing that are driving these conversions. But we need to take it to the next step, right? And we actually need to see, okay, if these things are all helping each other, which ones are helping, which ones are at the end, and how do I understand that? And so a great place to get into multi-touch measurement, into what's ultimately attribution, is a metric called assisted conversions. And so basically what we did was we broke down the data and said, okay, here are all your channels, and they're in the left-hand column, and here are all of the times that they appear in the conversion path in locations other than last click, right? And so we can see, like, on paid search, it assisted on 800 conversions, and for the last click, it was 1,200 conversions, right? And this is where we start to get into the data that says, like, oh, this is how much something is actually helping out, right? And we can see, like, on line 3, display advertising, right? They were only driving 66 conversions as a last click measurement model, but when we look at assists, we're like, whoa, they're actually assisting in 300 other conversions. And this is really important stuff, right? This is a simple way to wean yourself off of a last click model. For all of those businesses in that 38%, right, a real easy way to get moving on attribution is to just jump into assisted conversions and start to look at this data. And obviously, it's great to get in here and do some additional segmentation because you're running different types of campaigns, right? There's performance-based campaigns, there are brand-based campaigns, and you want to know that, especially in the display and the paid search channels. And same with email, right? Like email we see will appear in some of these reports as well, depending on how you use it. So you can do additional segmentation, which is really, really important. But just that simple insight that you're moving off of, whoa, right? Like display, I'm looking at it in a whole nother way now. So if you're doing a big brand investment, assisted conversions is a really, really great way to measure that. And this is really one of the ways that people can get started. So there were some great insights that Amari had. We talked about how they were actually they started to understand 44% bought on the first trip and landing on the site. So they invested in landing page improvements because they know, hey, for some people, I'm going to get one shot. I better have really good landing pages. But they also went through and they did a trial to expand their display campaigns, right? Because when they were seeing that display was so involved at the upper part of the funnel, they actually invested more in display, and they saw an 11% increase in bookings, right? Because more awareness, better brand penetration, and they were able to kind of then fill the funnel a little bit more. And more importantly, and this is probably the hardest thing for a lot of businesses, is that now there was a little bit more accountability and a little bit more insight into how channels were interacting. And the tools have come really far, and organizations kind of need to follow suit now. In my experience, and Nick, I'm sure you would talk about this, and Don, when you talk to folks as well, like sometimes, believe it or not, organizations can be pretty siloed. And the email people, they say things and are a little bit more territorial than maybe like the display advertising people, and maybe sometimes the search people like don't want to be as involved as other folks. And so it's important to come together, right, and to really understand that, sure, you guys are doing amazing stuff, but together it's even better. And the measurement will really help everybody really understand the true value of what they're doing. So multi-channel funnels, great place to get started in this. But if we go back and we think about these funnels and people and hitting them multiple times on the way to conversions, sure, right? When we're doing last click, and you'll see this on the next slide, we're giving all of the value, right, to that last click. And with multi-channel funnels, we basically create this model where we're distributing the value based on you're either last click or you're an assisting click, right? You're further up in the funnel. And we can actually go one step further now and move beyond multi-channel funnels into real attribution modeling. And this, it's great because within the product, there's a growth, right? There's a curriculum or a progression that you can go through to get to attribution models, right? You don't have to jump right in with these. You may be technically savvy enough, but maybe organizationally you're not ready. But with attribution models, what we're really dealing with is diving into those assisted conversions and distributing the credit or the revenue appropriately amongst all the touches prior to conversion. And we've tried to build some standard prefabricated models in order to make this easier. So of course we have a last touch model, right? That's kind of the default. Everyone knows that. We have a first touch model, which was also in Don's data. I forget how many people are using it, but basically, instead of giving all the credit to the last part, the last touch, we're giving all the credit to the first touch. My personal opinion, maybe not the greatest, but it might be good to look at. We have linear distribution models where everyone is equal and everyone gets the same amount of credit. And then we have position-based models where we can actually vary the amount of credit based on the position. So we could give maybe the first and the last touch the same amount of credit. We can give a little bit of credit to some of the folks that are in the middle. Maybe some touches don't get any credit at all. It's very customizable. And then we kind of have a decay model, right, where It's weighting things based on marketing and advertising that are closer to the actual conversion events. So it kind of gives a little bit of more credit to maybe some of the performance-based activities that are happening, maybe less to the upper funnel and the brand-based stuff. But it's kind of pre-programmed to have a half-life based on time and proximity to the actual conversion. So the whole idea behind this is that with attribution modeling, you pick a model. Actually, you pick multiple models, and you compare those models together. So if you're just getting started, it's great to do something like take a last-click model and maybe compare it to a position-based model. Let's say your organization, you do a lot of brand-based advertising, you spend a lot of money at the upper parts of the funnel, but then you also do a ton of performance, and you're hammering it at the end. And the idea is that you can compare the revenue for each channel based on these two models. And when you see big deltas, when you see big swings, like Model A versus Model B shows an increase of 40% revenue to a specific channel, that's where you can actually say, like, okay, our current model is not working right because it's vastly different than this new model that we're coming together. And I think a great example of this is through a case study that Nick's going to walk us through.
Yeah, Justin, thanks a lot. That's a perfect segue into another case that we can look at here with attribution modeling and really going beyond that last click attribution. So this is, I think, a really interesting story. This is a client of Cardinal Path's that really had some interesting challenges trying to kind of accurately value the contribution of display media as part of its online advertising portfolio. So this is a major organization doing over $1 billion in sales per year online. They're in a kind of interesting, highly competitive, arguably kind of commoditized industry. Big believers in sort of traditional media spend, so television, radio, the usual suspects, and digital, by contrast, has kind of a relatively lower budget and a lot of pressure to sort of prove its worth. And so this client had a really interesting experience using attribution modeling to finally kind of tease out and learn the true contribution of display. So let's take a look at how this plays out. When you're looking at the default Google Analytics attribution model, which, as Justin mentioned, is last click, it's not uncommon to see a scenario like this, where you see that display, which is labeled here as CPM, tends to look like sort of a laggard, kind of an underperformer when it comes to last click. And again, that's not very surprising, because display, if you think about it, is very much a top of funnel media channel, right? It's often intended to build awareness or to build sort of re-engagement rather than kind of the immediacy or that kind of transactionality. And so what you see here is that it's one of the smaller marketing channels here, certainly smaller than things like organic search or paid search. But when you look at the per visit value there on the right-hand side, which is a metric that I love, by the way, it really just boils down the value of your traffic into dollars and cents. Pretty clear to see here that display is an underperforming media channel. And so you're trying to be data-driven, you're using all these reports that calculate out your conversion rates to the second decimal point, and you're feeling good about this. But again, when you're using last click attribution, there are a lot of assumptions that get baked into how these metrics are being produced. And so what we want to figure out is, does display actually contribute anything, or is it truly an underperformer? And so it was actually really interesting. What our client ended up doing was they decided to simply pull the plug on display entirely. And again, if you look at that, per visit value, you can see how that's not really a strange conclusion to draw or hypothesis to want to explore. So they actually pulled the plug entirely on their display spend. And when you look at a chart like this, which shows kind of the long-term impact over several weeks and many months even, the immediate impact might be a little bit hard to discern. So let's just zoom in a little bit and actually talk about kind of the immediate results that they found. So let's look at just the first 30 days of this experiment. What we find is that there's actually a 17% drop in transactions, right? So quite a substantial decrease in transactions and a decrease in sales. And again, when you're doing more than $1 billion in sales online every year, you can think about what the sort of annualized run rate of this loss might be. So this was highly concerning, but also from an analyst point of view, extremely interesting, right? Because this just begs more questions, right? is this due to seasonality? Is it really due to pulling the plug on display? Could there be other contributing factors? And what we found was that, in order to be able to really understand this and get at the causality behind this, we really needed attribution modeling inside Google Analytics. And so why is that? And what did attribution modeling let us do? Well, what's really interesting, particularly when it comes to display, is that Google Analytics now lets you attribute performance to display both on a click-through basis, right? So that's people who actually click on display ads that they're seeing, as well as a view-through basis, which is really important because, as a lot of you probably know, display ads don't necessarily have very high click-through rates, right? They're more about just being seen, right? Just the impression and kind of staying top of mind with your brand in the mind of the consumer. And so when we attribute credit to things like just visits or certainly sales and revenue on a view-through basis for display, what we found was that over a fifth of all the traffic to the site was being generated by display on a view-through basis, right? A staggering amount of traffic. And on top of that, more than a quarter of the total revenue you could attribute to display under a view-through model. And so Justin mentioned that there can be huge swings in performance simply based on the attribution model that you choose to use, and this is an awesome real-world example of that, right? So we just saw how under a last-click model, we were pretty confident that display was really an underperforming media channel, and we pulled the plug on that budget, not knowing what would happen. As it turns out, again, actually a huge proportion of this company's revenue you can attribute back to the value of that display media. Let's look at this another way. So we talked about the idea of conversions versus assists, right? Assists would be sort of a touch point with that customer who comes back to the site later on and buys potentially via another marketing channel. So what we saw here was really mind-blowing. So what I'm showing you here is that for every sale that display ads kind of directly, immediately generated, right? For every sale, there were almost 200 what we call impression-assisted conversions, meaning display is not necessarily generating a lot of sales unto itself, right? But people are being exposed to display ads and then doing searches for this brand and buying later on. And so now that we understand kind of how much of an assist impact display has, it starts to make a lot more sense that pulling the plug on display would lead to a sort of downstream decrease in transactions and a decrease in sales. Again, for every sale that display was generating, almost 200 sales that it was assisting in. Really incredible, and the kind of stuff that frankly was impossible to get at before we had attribution modeling in Google Analytics. So with that attribution modeling tool, what's really neat about it, as Justin kind of hinted at initially, is that you can not only look at your data through a last touch lens, but also through any of these other attribution models that Google has built for us, right? So there's last touch, there's first touch, there's linear, there's the time decay. And the idea here that I think is really important to take away is that none of those attribution models is the right attribution model, right? The point of this isn't to figure out which attribution model is best and then replace last click with that new attribution model, but rather we want to take a look at our data and compare the way it looks in different attribution models, right? So comparing one against the other to see what kind of insights we can glean. And display is a great example because, again, display really isn't always about that kind of immediate direct response, that immediate kind of transactionality. It's about building engagement and building awareness. And so last click just often isn't the appropriate attribution model there. And by contrast, that first touch or first interaction model may give you much better insight into whether display is actually contributing anything for you. And what you see here is when we look at first interaction on a view-through basis, we're talking about a value of display in terms of the value of sales that it generates that's almost 2,000% higher than what you would see in a default Google Analytics report. So I mean, just really important implications for how you might do your marketing budgeting, for instance. Once you have this kind of insight, you really think twice about, for instance, lowering your display budgets. So again, the idea here isn't that there's one attribution model that's right and others that are wrong, but that you need to look at them in comparison to each other to really understand what your channels are doing for you. Now, if you saw that display media was still underperforming under a first touch model as well as a last touch model, then you'd have a lot more of a leg to stand on in terms of maybe finding a way to use that budget more efficiently. But this is a really common type of insight that we find with our clients, whether it's display buys or social media. Some of these channels that are typically more top of funnel tend to suffer from a last click attribution model, and it's not until we get into this attribution modeling tool that we're really seeing a lot of the hidden value of what these marketing channels are doing for us. So that's attribution modeling. I think one of the really important advances in Google Analytics in the last few years, and one that we really enjoy working with our clients on this kind of stuff. So with that, I'm going to toss it back to Justin for a little bit more, and this time we're going to shift gears and talk a bit about remarketing.
Yeah, thanks, Nick, and couldn't agree more, right? Like this is where we want everyone to be, right, in terms of measuring marketing effectiveness. But one of the things that we talked about was the fact that the technology has really allowed us to kind of catch up and introduce measurement that is modern and, to be honest, a little bit more accurate, right, when we're evaluating what's happening in the online space. And there's a lot of other tech that has advanced that really helps us reach the right customers. And a lot of the ways that I think about the future of digital marketing and digital advertising is trying to get back to what was done 40 years ago and 50 years ago, where, again, it gets back to we want to put the right message in front of the right person at the right time. Now, the challenge is in the digital space, that can be very hard to do, right? The web is huge. We have multiple devices. But the flip side is that we have a lot of information to identify the right user, and we have a lot of information to identify the right time. And remarketing is something that's been around on a lot of different advertising platforms for a while, and what we did was we tried to add a new twist to it. And what we've done is we've actually created remarketing within the analytics tool, within Google Analytics. And the whole idea is like you have your website, right, and you have a population of people that come to the website, and every analytics tool on the market has a segmentation feature, right? And the ability to segment people based on lots of different attributes. And in analytics, there's, I think, over 200 dimensions of data that you can use. You can segment based on metrics like frequency, user revenue for your business. You can even segment based on metrics from other systems. You can import them into analytics, and you can segment the data that way. But the cool thing is with the remarketing tool within inside of Google Analytics, we can let you create these really robust segments that are super detailed. And these are user-based segments, right? It's not session-based segmentation. It's actually segmenting users. And so what we're doing is we're looking at basically all the cookies, and we're saying, like, okay, this set of cookies, it actually matches the criteria that you've put forth in this segment. So it might be all of the users that came from California and have visited the site more than 3 times, but the revenue per user is 0. And what we can do with that complex segment is, in real time, analytics can segment the data on your site, and it can actually send a list of those users over to our other advertising tools. And if you're using the standard version of Google Analytics, it can send a list of users over to AdWords. If you're using our DoubleClick platform, it can send a list of users over to DoubleClick. And this is all done anonymously, right? It's all just numbers and anonymous identifiers to our systems. But what you can do is then you can use those lists of users that are generated based on site behavior to change the advertising experience that people have as they browse the internet or as they interact with Google search, right? So you can actually use these remarketing lists for search ads, or you can use it for display advertising as well. And to me, this is amazing, right? Because the behavioral signals that we get on the website are really, really important. We understand people who are at the upper part of the funnel, people who are at the middle part of the funnel, obviously people who are really, really close to converting or converted again. And it's a really great tool that lets us acquire new customers or retain our existing customers, right? And by moving the customization of our message off of our website and off into the interwebs, which is really important. So, let's look at how someone actually used this type of feature. And this is a a case study from a company called Global Tech LED. You can actually get this case study on the Google Analytics website. And they're manufacturers of LEDs, and they work with suppliers in the US and in international markets. And they recently launched a new product. And whenever you launch a new product, it's really important to put the message out there, right? To help people understand what is this project, what is the problem that it's solving, and to let people know. And so they had used Google AdWords in the past, and that did a really good job of driving new customers. But it needed to keep people engaged, right? People who were a little bit interested in this this product, had visited the website, read a little bit about it, but they weren't really moving down the funnel. And so what their challenge was, to really grab those people, get their attention, and bring them back to the website and move them through the funnel to a little bit to conversion. And so in order to use the remarketing with Google Analytics, it's literally just a switch that you turn on, right? And so literally in the admin settings, you can turn on the remarketing feature, and you can then start to create these remarketing lists. And there's a couple of different ways that you can do it. You can do it through manual segmentation. So obviously, businesses know their customers, know their content really well, so you can build out your own segments. Or what we've done is we've started to leverage some machine learning, and we've launched this feature called Smart Lists. And Smart Lists will actually algorithmically identify lists of users that are most likely to convert at your defined conversions. So as long as you have a certain threshold of data, it will run these models across your analytics data, and it will create these remarketing lists in real time. And it will send them over to our advertising tools, like I said, either AdWords or DoubleClick. And the cool thing is that when the remarketing list gets shipped over to the advertising tool, you can use it with all of the features that are in AdWords or within DoubleClick. So they were using our conversion optimizer feature, which is great because it automatically adjusts the bids to drive more conversions, right? So on the AdWords side, it's using algorithms and machine learning in order to say, like, okay, well, what's the best mix of spend to maximize the ROI? And so this is almost literally like 3 settings, and they were seeing some really fantastic results from this. So they doubled their website traffic. But also, it's not just about the traffic. They were finding that they were re-engaging with the users that they wanted to re-engage with, right? So they weren't just attracting a generic audience. All of this increased traffic was actually people coming back and re-engaging. And they were finding that these campaigns were driving 5 times more clicks and engagement than all of their other campaigns. And so to me, the reason I love this so much is because there's almost an endless opportunity to target messages, because you can create these micro segments, or you can have Google Analytics actually create these micro segments for you, and then you can customize the advertising and the marketing. It gets us closer to right message, right user at right time. So this is another way that I think, especially going into the holiday season this year, really start to think about people, where they are in the purchase funnel, and how can I vary my messaging in order to get the right person at the right time. So I think Nick's going to actually tie some of this together for us with some learnings from what we've talked about today.
Yeah, Justin, thanks so much for talking us through that. So we've covered 3 really big and really important analysis techniques that I think e-commerce businesses in particular are just really well poised to take advantage of. So thanks again for taking us through those. The thing I would sort of leave us with as we sign off here is that it's one thing to kind of learn these features, learn the point and click, so to speak, inside Google Analytics. It's another thing to put these into practice within your organization in a meaningful, structured way. And so, if you're struggling with kind of how to get started, kind of a few things I think that you should be thinking about. One is on our site at cardinalpath.com, you can do an organizational self-assessment of your digital analytics maturity. And what that's going to help you understand is your kind of respective strengths and areas for growth with respect to analytics. So a good example is we often work with clients that have invested a lot in having the most state-of-the-art tools, but don't have a corresponding investment in, for example, people who know how to use those tools. We often see the exact opposite as well, right? Lots of talent, lots of great analyst resources in the organization without being equipped with the tools they need to kind of meet their full potential. So take a look at your digital analytics maturity, and that's going to help you identify kind of where you need to invest moving forward. The next thing is, all the things that we just showed you today kind of rely on the assumption that you're A, collecting the data that you need, but then B, that you have confidence in that data as well. So be thinking about sort of a technical audit of your analytics platforms, making sure that you have the data you need, you don't have black holes around KPIs that you actually really need to be measuring, and that you truly trust your data. And then lastly, what we call kind of activating your data. We really want to help you get beyond just collecting data, doing reporting, putting together some dashboards, and actually using your data to create that competitive advantage. And that's a huge part of what we do here at Cardinal Path. And so with that, I'll just say thank you to everyone who attended. I think this was a great session. Thanks, Justin, again. And Don, I think I'll toss it back over to you, and I think we have a little bit of time to do some Q&A.
We do. And we do have some questions in the queue, but there's still time for everyone in the audience to ask your questions. Justin and Nick covered a lot of ground, a lot of interesting stuff, and if you have any questions, now's your chance. So let's get to the first question, which has to do with seasonality. This person who's in the audience says that her business is highly seasonal, and she wants to know how to carry out a good test without the results being affected by seasonality.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll be happy to take a stab at that one, and Justin, feel free to chime in if you want to as well. I hear a lot of people that have that same concern about seasonality and whether they can do things like test appropriately, given that it's a time of year that doesn't represent kind of the baseline. And for me, if you're doing things like split testing, you're in a controlled experiment no matter what time of the year it happens to be, right? So you're splitting people up between Group A and Group B, Message A and Message B, and so on. And so my concern would probably be larger if you were going to test throughout kind of a highly, sort of a unique time of the year, and then let that bleed into a different part of the year. But I don't see any reason to not test during a highly busy or even during an off part of the year. I don't know, Justin, what do you think?
Yeah, no, the word that you said that was important was controlled, right? If you're staying within a defined season and you're running a controlled experiment, right? You have a control group and it's within that time frame. Now, granted, you may run the same experiment in a different season, whether it's a busier season or a slower season, but with it as long as you have a control group, that's a critical part to any type of experiment, whether it's a website A/B test or a messaging test in marketing and advertising. And we've seen people that, what they'll do is they'll run the same test multiple times a year, right, to see exactly what's happening. And so they'll be able to say, yeah, in season A, this control test yielded these results, and in season B, it yielded these different results. And I think that, that's important, and you shouldn't, write that off. But again, the most important piece is having that control group really does help you validate what's going on.
Okay. Next question has to do with attribution involving offline channels. For example, how do you understand the impact of a catalog drop on search engine marketing or on digital channels in general?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and definitely a tricky question as well. So I'll take a stab at that one as well. One of the things that is actually fairly easy to do that a lot of people don't know about is to kind of integrate your offline media, such as a catalog drop, with your digital measurement, like Google Analytics. One of the ways that you can do that, just as an example, is through the use of vanity domains or vanity URLs. And so what you may do is print your catalogs up with one of those vanity URLs or vanity domains, and that's going to let you see kind of what's the digital impact of an offline initiative, right? How many people are actually coming to the site specifically because they're receiving your catalog in their mailbox. And once they do that, right, that's a touch point with that customer, where you're then going to be able to use things like multi-channel funnels and see, does someone who comes in for the first time from a catalog then subscribe to an email list? Do they do a search and click on your paid search ads? Do they come back through an organic search, and so on? And so, again, through those vanity URLs and vanity domains, we can kind of build that bridge between the online world and the offline world.
Yeah, and I'll jump in, and the omni-channel measurement is a lot harder, right? And the reason it's harder is now you're talking lots of different data sources, and one of the first things Nick said in the webinar is the thing that we love about a lot of businesses today is that they are digital, and when you start to move beyond that, then the systems and the tools that you use need to grow. Absolutely, the solution that Nick gave is great. And there are ways that you can wire up a lot of solutions using some homegrown code and some standard products like Google Analytics or even Google Analytics Premium. But really, if you're a big multi-channel organization, you need to start thinking at other solutions. And one of the things that we do provide is we actually have another tool called Odometry. We acquired this company about 1.5 years ago, and specifically because it's built to do omni-channel, right? It's built from the ground up to consume data from not only web, not only from advertising, digital advertising, but also from the offline world as well. And it uses more advanced algorithms in order to build out models and waterfall diagrams to show things like the incremental lift of online and offline and how they're actually working together. So you do need to kind of think about, like, all right, how much do we straddle both of these worlds? Where are we in terms of size as a company, right? If you're $2 million in revenue, then probably not a target for this type of tool. But if you're a large multi-channel global organization, then there is better technology in order to measure and do attribution.
Okay, next question. What advice do you have for manufacturers who do not sell direct, but are instead trying to drive sales to an external retail platform such as Amazon?
That's a really good question, and that's something that hits close to home for me because one of the clients I'm working with right now fits that exact description. So we talked about sort of the value of a KPI framework, right, at the start of the session. And one of the things that's really important is to really map out, what are the activities on the site that actually correspond with success. And so this is a good example of kind of clicking out to a retailer or clicking out to like on a buy now button or find this product type of button. And I think what you can do is, you can almost treat that as the transaction on your site, right? That's about as far down the funnel as someone's going to go on your own website. And so just like we saw, in this example of using multi-channel funnels, using attribution modeling to understand the value of marketing channels in generating sales on our own sites, we can take some other kind of user action or some other kind of behavior, even something as simple as clicking on a button to visit a third-party retailer, treat that as the endpoint of the customer journey, treat that as the conversion, and use the same analysis techniques that Justin and I walked through during this session. So a slightly different scenario, but really I think the same techniques apply almost in almost the same way.
Okay, next question, and I hear this one a lot. How do you measure attribution across devices?
Oh yeah, that's the $64 million question.
Nick, I'll let you go first on that one.
Okay, I was hoping you would take it.
No, I'm happy to. And this is one that's maybe I'll put my Google hat on and talk that we're coming at it from a number of different ways. And I think one thing that's important is that from the Google perspective, right? We obviously have a lot of different products, and analytics is our first-party measurement tool, right? And it's meant to help you understand what's happening on your owned and operated systems, whether they're apps or their websites. And so one of the things that we do help you do is tie data together between multiple devices. Now, the caveat is that we require you to have kind of like an identifier for your users. So if you have a CRM ID or some other canonical customer identifier, you can actually use that in analytics in order to deduplicate users and show cross-device usage. So let's say it's a loyalty card and someone's on the website and they're logged in. You can, when all that data is getting sent to analytics, the user ID is the ID from the loyalty program. And same thing if they're in the app or if they're in the mobile website and they're logged in and the ID, you use the loyalty card ID, all the data is associated with that ID. And so when we're processing all this data, we're deduping, right, across the IDs. Now, obviously, the drawback is that you guys need to, or businesses need to supply that ID. We don't actually supply one of those IDs. Now, the value is, right, you're getting a good understanding of a really important segment of your users, right, your most loyal customers that are probably the most valuable, and the customers that you want to attract more of. Moving beyond that, and this is kind of where the broader Google story comes in, is that we are investing heavily in the multi-device measurement. And so products like AdWords have cross-device conversion estimation that are built into them, right? Where we're using the data that we have across Google in order to better understand users, their multi-device habits, and their interaction with your advertising in order to do better attribution and help you understand that multi-device story. The downside is that it's obviously very much focused on Google-owned and operated advertising and not really that holistic view that could slice across social and email and all of the other channels that you might be using. But it's definitely something that we're working on a lot in order to bring everyone a good solution.
Okay, we just got a couple more minutes, so move quickly. Is the impression-assisted metric the same as view-through attribution metric, and is it available through Google Analytics?
Yeah, so those are essentially the same thing, right? So the whole idea is that with view-through attribution, we don't require the user to actually click on a display ad that they're seeing. Simply being exposed to it, whether they click on it or not, is enough to sort of pull that person into the attribution model. And so when we say view-through, it's sort of the same as like impression-through. So impression-assisted would be very analogous to view-through attribution. I think there was a second part of that question that I've managed to forget already.
Is it available in Google Analytics?
Oh, yes, absolutely it is. Yep.
Okay. What should determine which attribution model you should pick? The number of digital channels, length of sales cycle, or other factors?
I could take that one. For me, Don, what I would say is, I would really look at the marketing channels that you're playing in and ask yourself, what purpose does this marketing channel serve, right? Is this kind of a bottom of funnel transactional channel? Is this more of a top of funnel, awareness channel? Or is it somewhere in the middle? Something like email marketing often is kind of that middle piece of maintaining engagement over time and bringing folks back to the site time and again. And based on kind of where in the customer journey these marketing channels fit, there's usually an attribution model that's most appropriate for that channel. So display and first touch, in my opinion, often sort of go well together. And kind of the point that I was making there toward the end of the presentation is that it's not so much that one attribution model is the right one, but there's an appropriate channel for there's an appropriate model for each of your channels. And if you find, for example, that something like social or display is an underperformer both in a last click world as well as a first click world, then you have much more solid evidence that marketing channel, you're not executing in that channel in a valuable way right now. You may want to take that budget and move it somewhere else.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in with one thing. I think the two critical things that people need to keep in mind when building out attribution models is first, how are you using the channels, right? We usually divide the world into two categories. It's either brand or performance, right? And And brand is definitely going to get measured very, very differently than a performance-based campaign. And Nick gave a great example with email, right? Like email is one of those things that's amazing at the bottom of the funnel, right, where you're sending people emails that might have offers or discounts or whatever it may be, but you're also sending them emails with great content from your blog, right? The whole content marketing paradigm is built on giving people great content to keeping them engaged, whether they're an existing customer or a potential customer. So fleshing out your channels and saying like, this is email that's that's brand, or this is email that's performance, or however you want to name it, you can do that. I think the other important thing to remember when you're building out the model is, what is your investment, okay? And so because attribution not only is about the channels, but how much credit they're going to get. So if you're spending a lot of time and money and energy in upper funnel activities, right, because you're in a really crowded marketplace and you need to break through and you need to have that strong message, then I might weight those activities at the beginning of the funnel higher. I might give them more credit, right? And so I think that's something you need to look at internally is, what is your investment? Because ultimately, what we're trying to do is not only understand how the channels are working, but the value of the channels. And value is the calculations are also based on investment.
Okay, we're at the top of the hour, so we're going to have to wrap this up. We will. People whose questions didn't get answered, Cardinal Path will respond offline. I want to thank Justin Catroni and Nick Iyengar of Justin of Google and Nick Iyengar of Cardinal Path for a lot of great insights. Thank you all for attending. This is Don Davis, an internet retailer, signing off. Have a great day.